Veiled threats of breaking up the government, revelations the Kingmaker is lining up for another rodeo, and the PM's tough talk to councils. There is never a boring week in politics, and here to digest it all with us, our Chief Political Correspondent Tova O'Brien and Senior Political Correspondent Jenna Lynch. Kia ora guys, tēnā koe.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Sam.
So, Tova, we'll kick off with you. The week kicked off with Koro Neihana, the anniversary of the coronation of the Māori King, and the coalition government didn't get the warmest of receptions, did it?
No, they got an absolute earful, Sam. Tuku Morgan, the former spokesperson for the King, the former advisor to the King, telling the government that they threw Māori under the bus and ran them over. Rahui Papa, who is the current spokesperson for the King, saying, mess with our mokopuna, we will not sit quietly. And that laundry list of policies affecting Māori that was hauled out in front of the Prime Minister. To his credit, though, Christopher Luxon at least showed up. The same couldn't be said of David Seymour and the ACT Party. They were the only party not to be represented there at Tūranga Waiwai Marae. There was an element as well of the theatrical demands on the government on the Prime Minister not to support the Treaty Principles Bill. The Prime Minister saying he wouldn't support the Treaty Principles Bill beyond the first reading. All of that had been well established at Waitangi. So both sides kind of playing a bit of a role there to reiterate the point, and it probably worked for both sides as well.
And Jenna, David Seymour then went and ramped things up a notch.
Yeah, despite, as Tova said, those positions being well communicated before, all three parties seem to have think they may have taken a harder line this time. David Seymour's team was really quick to jump out and make the comparison with Christopher Luxon last Friday, telling the Waitangi Tribunal that they had been premature in their report on the Treaty Principles Bill because it hadn't yet been drafted, comparing that with Christopher Luxon taking a position on the Treaty Principles Bill before it had been drafted. David Seymour even went as far as calling the Prime Minister anti-democratic and disrespectful for that position. And when we put it to him whether, he would go as far as breaking up the coalition over it, he simply said that he never plays poker with his cards on the table. That is not a no.
Sparks were certainly flying. And Tova, you spoke to Shane Jones this week and he revealed Winston Peters' intentions for the next election. Was he supposed to?
Yeah, Winston Peters back, baby, big time. I think Shane Jones accidentally let that slip because he then kind of tempered his language. He initially said he was absolutely confident that Winston Peters would be standing again in 2026. Winston Peters has actually confirmed that today as well. So he's going to be back for another round. 47 years, guys, after he was first elected to Parliament. And we think 20 elections, including by-elections, that he has now stood in. This changes some of the political calculus and the predictions around the coalition as well. A lot of people had predicted the coalition's demise, that it would implode before 2026, and many people were pegging Winston Peters as the arsonist. But now that we know he's standing, you've got to think back to all of that mud that he has slung at Labour, at the Greens, at Pāti Māori in particular, and it's hard to see him working with those parties on the left. It's all the same players that he was throwing that mud at in the first place, and so it's hard to see him as well burning what he has on the right. David Seymour, on the other hand, as Jenna pointed out, playing a dangerous game of political brinkmanship there.
Indeed. And just finally, Jenna, the Prime Minister dished out some tough love about council spending this week. How's that gone down?
Yeah, sounds like the mayors thought that they needed that lecture from the Prime Minister, like they needed another hole in a water pipe in their cities. He got audible groans during his speech to them when he was going on about the fanciful spending on the likes of convention centres when they need to be fixing their pipes, potholes and picking up rubbish. Hipkins had another lash at the Prime Minister today. The government actually backed it up with kind of this threat to councils that if they didn't keep their rates under control, it would investigate ways to make them do so. In a stroke of incredibly bad timing for the Prime Minister and the government, they then came out the next day and announced that they were co-funding a dance competition with Auckland Council. We will leave the charge of hypocrisy up to the jury of voters to decide on that one.
Fantastic. Jenna Lynch and Tova O'Brien, thanks so much. That is the week in politics. Tēnā koe.